Yeah.
Well, this is going to sound like a terrible, silly cliche or a politically correct answer, but any friend of Robert's is a friend of mine.
Rob's always been
Hey,
good people, always.
yeah,
Yes,
I
good.
have my moments. I have my moments. But at the heart of me, yeah. And I want to thank everyone for joining me early this morning after the time change. I don't know if all the states are still doing it. We're a lot of places now here on Creating Greatness Podcast. We're doing a very important show. That's why you see the biggest gathering as to date to talk about marriage. That's right, folks. So we have Tony, Heather, Andrew. Let's go ahead and pass it to Heather first. The very first time on the show, one of my oldest and dearest friends, an entrepreneur with 2 businesses, y'all. Jersey Girl Tans, all organic products, comes right to your location, gets you looking right for the big events. And also, I wish I had it close by, makes beautiful totes with quotes. Mine says Creating Greatness, of course, but they're in all different designs, fully customizable. Heather, thank you so much for joining in.
Thanks for asking me to be on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Tony, we all know Tony, the Examine Life podcast. My very favorite guest. My very favorite guest, Tony. How you doing this morning, brother?
I'm good. I'm doing good.
And Andrew, we needed the man, Andrew, the man with the statistics, the man with all the structure, Andrew Johnson from the 313 Men, Money, and Marriage podcast. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, Robert. It is a pleasure once again to come on your show.
Yeah, man. So I really thought it was important. So thanks everyone for coming out. I read a statistic the other week, and it saddened me. It truly saddened me. Getting married, having children is one of the most amazing experiences of my life. It's the best thing that ever happened to me by far. And I know there's a lot of folks out there that's not for them. That's not the path they want to take. And that's all well. But there are folks out there that are lonely. And there's folks out there that are suffering. And it does sadden me to know that folks looking for this will not experience the joy and absolute harmony and peace that I get to. And many people that live this family life, 30% now of young men and women are single, 34% women, and 63% of men. And this has increased at a drastic rate over, let's say, the last 20 years to be approximate. And we just want to start off with that. And Heather, I'm going to go to you first, women first, and only also the first time on the show. And also that you had an interesting perspective on this because you have a young man, son. And I thought that it was lack of courage, lack of social settings, all these other reasons, but you're telling me it might be something entirely different.
Yeah, I originally, my husband and I had this discussion probably when they went back to school after the schools were shut down. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it too. The social isolation that they felt during the pandemic, schools were closed, but when they went back to school, he just never expressed an interest in females. So, we didn't push the issue. He's my baby boy, so he can stay with me as long as he wants. But he would tell, I would ask him, we would have conversations, and he would just say, Mom, I'm just not interested. Like, there's nothing interesting about these girls. I'm just not. And his friends are also like that. So I've also questioned his friends, and I'm friends with their moms, and they would all tell me the same thing. And I, even just yesterday, we had a conversation about it, and he's like, no, he's like, I want to get a new car. I want to graduate high school, and I want to get a job. That's where my focus is. He said, I'm not worried about girls. I'm like, okay, I understand that. But I think they're all just super picky about girls. And I don't know why. There's 800 kids in his school. So it's not like he doesn't have, any females to pick from, but I don't know what it is.
Andrew, what do you think this disconnect is and why young men and women are not getting together as much as they were 10, 20 years ago?
Well, we were getting ready to, we're going to in the near future do a podcast on modern day dating, an episode on modern day dating. And I've talked about this numerous times on the podcast. And the best way I can describe it is it's literally two ships passing in the night. What's going on? And it's very, very clear, and it's very, very evident. And I get into the marriage statistics really quickly afterwards. On our show, we encourage people. We don't, I won't say to use the word encourage. We recommend that it's probably at some point in a man's interest, because we're talking, the show is Men, Money, and Marriage. Not that women don't play a role in the show, because they do, but we encourage men at some point. We basically recommend, no different than when you load up that computer and you're getting ready to download something onto your computer and it says you can do it this way, but this is the way we recommend. Well, that's what we do. We recommend it for several reasons, and which I get into later. But what's going on is the girls who are turning into women, when they reach that age of, say, they start to get in their late high school years, get over the age of 18 to essentially 34, 35, those are their prime years. That's when they will have the most choice to date as many guys as they pretty much can or want to, or they have a lot of selection. They get things for nothing, basically. All they have to do is be pretty, and they can get certain things just because they're pretty. Like one of the questions I'd asked a girl I had a conversation with who's in her early 30s, I says, have you ever been in a VIP in a club? And she said, yes. I says, how much did you have to pay to get in? She said, I didn't have to pay anything. I says, I'm over 50 and I've never been in a VIP of a club. So the point I'm making is that she has value just by showing up. And what's going on is, because of social media, our selection process has gotten it's out of control. So we're meeting people all over the country, all over the world. And if any of these people have any resources or anything, they can bring us to them. They can spend a 3-day weekend with this person. And in that girl's mind, she's been treated like a queen for 3-4 days. She thinks this is where she belongs. But that's not her level. That's not her level. The diamonds, and I say this to women all the time, the diamonds are in your backyard. You just got to go look for them. And all I basically say when I make that statement is that your husband that you want lives 20 to 30 minutes away from you. You're just not looking for him because you have social media and you can reach this broad audience of people. The guys, what's going on is they don't reach their physical prime until they get into their late 20s. So when they turn about 28 years old is when their body starts to change a little bit and they get into that physical prime. And their physical prime will last all the way till their early 40s. So what happens is now they have the choices. They're starting to get the choices that the women were getting when the women were in their 20s. So now if I get a girl who's, say, 30 and she never has been married, but she dated a lot of guys that probably weren't good for her, she starts looking for those guys in her age group that she probably turned down in her 20s. And those guys now have the choice that she had, and her choices are starting to dwindle away. That's why I say it's two ships passing in the night. The timing is off. Women, if they want to, someone who want to get married, they need to do it when they have the most choices, the most options, because then it'll be a lot easier for them. Waiting to do it later, it makes it a lot more harder because you're competing against not just women in your age group, you're competing against women who are younger than you. You might have a child or children. Other girls may not. It's very competitive right now for marriage because we're not doing it as much as we used to. So therein lies the problem.
Do you think because of that disconnect, like you say, two ships passing in the night where the women have a certain window of premium selection and then the men's window of premium selections a little later on in life? Do you think that's why I talk to my wife, obviously, a lot? She's my best friend. As to a lot of her friends that are married, they're with older guys almost every time. I mean, my wife's 31, I'm 44, and we see very frequently like a decade difference.
Yes. Well, one of the reasons why that happens is this is going to sound unfair, to women to an extent, but it really isn't. It's just women have their prime.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it's roughly between 18 to 34, 35. And it kind of lines up with childbearing years, if you haven't quite figured that out yet. Because
Mm-hmm.
honestly speaking, sometimes the older women get, the better looking they get. So it's not necessarily a situation to where they're not looking as good. It's just that men are thinking on a biological standpoint. So that's one. Then the other issue is that men, after they leave their physical prime, start to go into what we call a financial prime. And I did an episode on this way back when I first started the podcast, talking about the male financial prime years. And those years are roughly about a decade. So they start at maybe say 44, 45, and then they go to about 55. All right. And that's just basically, if you look it up statistically speaking, that's when men generally throughout the course of their life, that's when they're probably going to make the most money. That applies to me. That applies to anyone in that age group, because if you're not a manager, supervisor, you're an expert in your field at that point, because you've been working on the job for so long or in that field for so long.
Mm-hmm.
You become sort of an expert and you get rewarded and compensated as such. So women who might be in their early 30s are seeing that man going into his financial prime, even though he might be slowly dwindling out of his physical prime, still makes him very attractive. Right. If that makes sense. He's still very attractive. So that's not uncommon to see a men married, being about 10 to 15 years older than their significant other. You know, that's not uncommon, because those men are now starting to, you know, obviously, you know, women look for, you know, protection, provision, security, and those men, you know, may have the resources to provide it. So that's why you'll see that.
Well, despite all these difficulties, us four have seemed to figure it out. I asked you all on because, you know, I love the way that you speak. Tony, Andrew, I have you on all the time. Great speakers. Heather, because you've been successfully married for a very long time. I don't know exactly. And also
22 years in June.
How many?
22 in June. We've been together 27.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Hey,
Thank you.
We have all figured it out. And Tony, I ain't been able to hear from you yet. Real quick, what do you think the disconnect is? And how did you do it? You know, I don't need any details, whatever you're comfortable with. How did you meet? You know, how long you've been together, things like that.
Well, first off, I would say my wife's 11 years younger than me. And the reason I picked her was so when I get old, she can wheel me around in my chair. You know, you need somebody younger, because I know I'm going to need that. I'm looking forward towards that. And no, we've been married 15 years. This is my second marriage. And we met. I knew her family. I used to deliver frozen food to her whole family. So I knew her, and I was married, my first marriage, and I knew her family. And then, well, over the course of the years, she ended up working for me at a pizza place. I was her manager. And then at that time I was divorced, and we started dating and got married. So how did we do it? Oh, well, I feel like a lot of it's cultural, and a lot of it's how you grew up and what you think about marriage. You know, you asked about why people aren't getting married, and frankly, why marriages aren't lasting very long. I think it's what you're raised with, and the ideal of what marriage means to you. You know, to me, my parents and this ideal of the ideal family and what love was and what security was and what happiness was. You know, when I was a young man, I was just chasing women and going around crazy. But ultimately I looked at that as the ideal, as my parents were married 30 some years, you know, and that's what I looked forward to. That was what I could reach to. And that was maturity. That was success, to find a woman that I could love and be married to, and we could treat each other well, and we could raise our children, you know. And I think that children, I mean, don't know. I mean, from the experts I've listened to, I think that people look at the institution of marriage differently now. I don't think they revere it. I don't think they see it as the ideal anymore. And even the nature of the family has changed. You know, what's considered a family, what's considered normal family. Kids grow up not seeing that as the pinnacle of success and the ideal of how a family should be. So They don't value marriage as much. And I think, frankly, too, we're all talking about America, I think. But if you look, if you even look at it globally, almost all the experts I've heard talk about this is the more affluent a country is, the lower the birth rate and the lower the people don't want to spend the money. It's expensive to have a family, get married, have a family. The more money that families have, the less they really want to spend it, the less children they have. And I think you'd see a different marriage and birth rate in countries that don't make as much too. I think it's because it's a socioeconomic issue. So how did I do it? I don't know if there's a one size fits all for everyone. I know that I valued marriage, and my wife now valued marriage. We said we're going to make it work no matter what. Mm-hmm. You email you sent me about overcoming difficulties in the marriage and stuff. I think every marriage has issues that could cause a divorce at some point. You see marriages that have affairs, financial disputes. They have disputes over how to raise the kids, and some of them fall apart and some of them stay together. And I think the difference is how devoted the members are in the marriage to that vow they made to each other. My wife's like, we're going to stay together, and if it doesn't work out, I'm going to kill you and bury you in my tomato garden. That's how she feels about it. And I know that we're going to make it work. There's no walking out. There's no walking away. We decided to enter this. Mm-hmm. And I think that the more you know yourself and the more you understand who you are as a person and what you value as a person and who you are, and a real clear picture of who you are, the better kind of husband or wife you can be. And then you pick someone that you can be more sure of what they want. But there's luck involved too. You got to pick someone you can grow together. My wife is unbelievably, she is 100 times the woman I even thought she was when I married her. Mm-hmm. She is unbelievable. But we had to grow together. You got to grow together over 15 years, And, you learn. Unfortunately, I learned a lot of lessons from my first marriage. My first marriage was difficult. There was difficult parts. I wasn't the greatest husband. I didn't pay enough attention. I didn't know myself. I thought I knew everything. And she just wasn't as committed to staying in that. And then that's it. I think I was thinking about what to say to you. And I said, if you put the other person's need ahead of your own, if her needs and loving her is more important than loving yourself, you put her first and she puts you first, you're going to make it. I think you're going to make it. But you have to kind of put yourself aside and say, I'm devoted to my wife. I'm devoted to her needs and loving her and taking care of her. And if she does the same for you, then it's just like you can fight over how much you're loving each other. You ever have weird fights like that? Like, you're trying to convince the other person to take care of themselves and they want you to take care of you and you want to take care of them. It's like, that's mm-hmm. the key to me. But, some marriages, they survive anything and others don't. I think it's about the commitment to that contract, that vow you made to each other. And I think it's about humility. Are you willing to love the person more than you love yourself? Are you willing to put them first, love them like you love yourself? And that's what's worked for us. And it's unbelievable to have a partner to spend your life with, a best friend. That's a cliche too, Andrew. You said about a cliche earlier, but that's true too. If she's your best friend, like you want to hang out with her more than you do anybody else, you enjoy spending time with her. She makes you laugh. You can tell her anything. You share interests, not all interests, that'd be boring, but you guys have things you love to do together. You're set.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that everybody experiences those difficult times like you speak. I almost thought it was kind of a drastic statement, but then thinking back, I thought, no, if you don't nip things in the bud, I think that every married couple probably does experience a problem or two that could potentially lead to divorce, but it does go back to that commitment, that level of devotion that you have for each other and the institution that you entered. Heather, you said you're coming up on 22 years. Wow.
22. Yeah.
That is amazing. And I'm pretty sure you guys faced some sort of difficulties within that time. Without going into details, could you give me a story of resilience?
Oh, geez. Where do I begin? Resilience. Okay. My husband had a drug problem.
You guys worked together to make it through.
Yeah, my husband had a drug problem. He was addicted to opiates, and I didn't know that early on. He was able to, right before our son was born. We were married for about 5 years before my son was born, and I gave him. He had always wanted to get clean, but I gave him an ultimatum. I said, "Listen, I can't have you be a part of our family if you do not fix yourself, if you do not get clean. And I will do whatever I can to help you," because I wasn't willing to give up. I knew what kind of person he was before his addiction. So I knew he could be that again. And with a lot of perseverance, praying, help from family, he was able to overcome it. So he's been clean 18 years. But that, that played a huge part. I mean, we were on the brink of divorce because of that, because with that also comes, financial issues. Money was missing because he's, buying drugs. And so that was a long road. If I didn't have the kids to kind of create that bumper for something else for me to focus on, and give him something to focus on, I don't know that we would have made it, but neither one of us were willing to give up. I grew up with, as you know, single parent. My mom was it. And he grew up, his mother was a single parent. She raised 4 kids on her own. So neither one of us were willing to give up a dream that both of us wanted because we didn't have that. And here we are 22 years later.
God bless, man. God bless.
Yeah. Rob, can I make a comment about that?
Sure.
I'm really, really happy for your husband and you. That's just,
me too.
Isn't that great? That's so
Yes.
awesome.
It is. And I'm amazed by him every day because of that.
But my mom said, I was saying my mom and dad were married 30, I think maybe 35 years. And I know my dad was, could be really tough to, I mean, I loved him so much. He was the best, but he could be tough. It was his way or the highway. And my mom said on numerous occasions, she said, if we were married, if you transferred our marriage in today's age, we probably would never have made it because of the way that people value marriage differently. My grandmother and my grandfather, they were married like 40 years, and I'm not condoning this, but he cheated on her, left her, was gone for 5 years, and didn't come back until I was born as a little baby, and they stayed together. Now, that's crazy, right? But there was no divorce. You don't get divorced. And so there's something to said about the social pressure. There's a social pressure for certain things, good and bad, that keeps things afloat in a society, institutions, and the social pressure, as far as to stay married, has dwindled. And you see what happens when social pressure, when the social ideas change about something, when that goes away, those constraints, people go hog wild. It's true.
Yeah.
I think that's why there's like a balance to it, man. Like it's such a tightrope, and that's why I certainly encourage folks to do that self-reflection, do that self-work, because it's gonna clarify where those lines stand. But that ultimatum that Heather gave him, that was what it was. There are times where we have to make the right decisions for ourselves, for our children. And I can relate because my wife gave me a very similar ultimatum very early on. I was still like you were with your first marriage, Tony, finding out who I was, figuring out myself, understanding how to love myself, understanding how to equally love another person, or even put another person before me or before my wants and needs, or in this circumstance, before my primal desires or my urges, and understanding what is appropriate and what is respectful, what is honest and righteous, and all these things. I still was learning all these things. And that's why if you listen to some of my older episodes, I speak so highly of women in our lives that are committed to us, that love us enough to give us these ultimatums. Because through that, I became a way better person as I shaped and molded my wife to be more self-confident, more stronger backbone, not getting walked on or manipulated or abused by people in her life. She made me righteous, calm, soft, the ability to stay strong and tough, but be gentle, how to accept things as they are and not force things. So I do believe that there is that time to lay forth that ultimatum, because if the person is the person, they're going to rise to the occasion, and that goes both ways. But Andrew, talk to me about some difficult times that you and your wife were able to overcome by working together.
Oh, that's a good question. One advantage I think that I had is I've known my wife when she's 14, turning 15. And then we dated for a little bit in high school. I was about 3-4 years older than her. And then literally we just were friends because I went in the military, and, we just, doing different things. I was all over the world pretty much. And she stayed back, back in the same area. And but we always stayed friends. We had mutual friends who we were really close with. And so literally 20 years later, we reconnected. We both were getting out of bad not marriages, but bad relationships. And so the timing just lined up correctly, so that's kind of how we got together pertaining to that. But the hardest part of our marriage was the very beginning, because the first year of our marriage, we didn't live in the same state. Oh, wow. Yeah, we were a state over. So we were about 3.5 hours away from each other. And then when we finally did live together, we had a newborn child, and we had just my income. And we had to live, and I had to make a mortgage payment. And I don't have to explain to you how expensive formula and diapers and all that stuff is, but we really, really struggled financially the first 2 to 2.5 years of our marriage. And this was right during, I don't know if you remember this, and Tony, because Tony sounds like he's been married about the same amount of time that I've been married, this was right around the time when the economy had collapsed. So there weren't any jobs anyway, so my wife couldn't even get hired. Yeah, 2008, 2009. In that period, we got married in 2008. Yep. And so my wife starts looking for a job in like say 2010, 2011. And she finally got one place to call that accepted her, to bring her on. And it was for a very low amount of money. I mean, it was above minimum wage, but nothing spectacular. And as silly as this sounds, we celebrated when she got that job, because it was like lifting a burden off of my shoulders, even though if she could only pay 1 or 2 bills, that's 1 or 2 bills that I don't have to pay. Wow. But the point that I'm making with that is that even though that was a small thing that happened, it really helped us, and we really appreciated it. And so a lot of people now, as marriage has sort of become this thing where it's, what can this person do for me? Yeah. If you listen to what Tony said and kind of what Heather said, they said that they put the other person first. They sacrifice. That's what marriage is. You're giving up something in order to receive something in return. Guess what? Sometimes it's not going to be equal value. There may be years in a marriage. This is one thing that people really struggle with and don't understand it. There may be years in a marriage where somebody may be doing 80, 90%. The other person is doing 10 or 20%. And that's okay. Because the universe is going to, at some point, flip that script. So give you a quick example. Several years ago, I had to have arthroscopic knee surgery. And, we had, my son was still running around. He was about maybe, 6 years old or so. And I was on crutches for 6 weeks. Wow. I couldn't do anything. So my wife was essentially having to do everything for me to an extent. I mean, I could do certain things, but it would take a long time because I had to hobble around on these crutches. But if I was single, I don't know how I could have got through that. I really don't, because when, before we got married, my family didn't live anywhere near me. It was just me. So I don't know how I would have got through those 6 weeks by myself. I mean, so that's the importance of it. And every marriage, one thing you have to understand real quick, Robert, and I'll pass it back, is that when you get married, and I'm sure Tony and Heather can attest to this, everybody has got stuff. Okay, there's Heather talked about a drug problem. Some other people might have a gambling problem. Some other people have a spending problem. Everybody's got something that they're dealing with and battling with. Mm-hmm. If that person thinks that if they're struggling with something and they see that you're willing to work with them and go through those difficult times to make sure that they're on the other side, you don't have anything, regardless of how they might feel at the time, regardless of what they may say at that time, at the end of the day, they're going to love and support you. And when you have your stuff, rears its ugly head at some point as well, because that's just part of it. There's nobody coming into marriages for the most part that has everything as this perfect linear line and everything is good. People got issues. One of the things I say on the show is that when I talk to some of the men about dating women, I says, you're never dating you're never in competition with another man for a woman. And I said, you're never, regardless of who's out there trying to date her, regardless of who that is, your situation is you're in competition with her childhood and her past, because that is what's going to drive her decisions in her future. Mm. So that's what you're competing against. Don't never look at it like, oh, she likes this other guy down the street. There's a reason why she likes that other guy down the street, and it doesn't have anything to do with you. And so don't never feel like it's a competition, because it's not. It's just you have to understand that people have stuff that they have to go through. Mm-hmm. And if that person is not, it can't go through or isn't going through it the way you think they should go through it, or is struggling with their issues, that may not be the person for you. Mm-hmm. There's a millions of other people out here that you can, go on a date with, get married to, or whatever the case may be. Don't get caught up in just dealing with one person who's not maybe ready for the blessing that you might be able to give them.
Mm-hmm. And it all goes back to focus on yourself. When I first started dating my wife, I was absolutely fully focused on myself, just trying to become better, trying to do the right thing, trying to become the best possible version of myself. And that is very attractive within itself. I also was thinking about what you were saying about your knee surgery, and it relates back to a statistic that you mentioned on a previous episode that we did. I don't know the exact percentage or the exact age, but you might, Andrew, that married men live longer.
Yes.
Married people in general, I think.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I do want to say to, and that's something that women can bring up to men who are talking about that they don't want to get married. Social media is really messing the game up a little bit, just simply because
longer. Come on.
Yeah, we do. But the thing is that, you hear a lot of the red pill content out here telling men not to get married. And it's ridiculous, because some of the guys who created the content are married. Then you hear them say stuff like, oh, don't mess with a baby mama. They're going to do this, that, and the other. And then they end up marrying a baby mama. So that's why I say don't listen to that stuff, because they're doing it for money. And so it's about preying on people's feelings and emotions. But the statistic, Robert, that I had read a long time ago was that getting to age 65, married men generally can reach the age of 65. It's about 89% of the time if they're married. If they're single, it drops down to the low 60s. Mm.
Oh, wow.
So a little more, like essentially, a little more than half is the number. And so that's why one of the reasons why we, say to men, hey, getting married at some point in your life is probably in your best interest. It could be an issue of life and death. Yeah. Because married couples tend to be healthier. Married couples are less likely to live in poverty. There's so many upsides to it, but we put so many downside pictures into it that it makes it to where people are saying, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to go through that. But that's what we're dealing with now. So,
and it's also the metaphysical aspect, man. You're going to live healthier. You're going to live longer. You're probably going to live with more financial means and more comfort, but you're also going to experience something that is absolutely indescribable and unrelatable in any other aspect of life. And I think Tony touched on it earlier, is like, now he sees his wife in a totally different light. I see my wife in a different light. I look at my wife now and think, wow, I didn't even realize that this creature exists, man. But, and I'm sure she looks at me in that way, because when you're continually working with someone day in and day out, excuse me, devoted, committed, encouraging them to be their best selves without being intimidated. Like, I remember when we were younger, there's so many things that I was told by male role models that was so utterly wrong. And I mentioned that on my last episode that I did with Cam and CL, addressing single men. But I remember guys used to say, oh, you can't have her confident or thinking that she's all that. You have to keep her in her place. And at the time I was a young man, but it still seemed wrong to me. And now that I've experienced the flip side of that, I know just how wrong it is. Because when you lift your woman up, she lifts you up. When you continually encourage and motivate, my wife always says it, I'm your biggest cheerleader, you know, and I'm her biggest fan. And when you work together in that way, to the same ends, day in and day out, you both evolve, you both grow, and your love grows. And you hear it in songs, you hear it in cliches. We're talking a lot of cliches today. But absolutely, I love my wife now more today. And I'm confident that I will in a month, in a year, than I did when we met. Or when we even got married. I wouldn't have married her unless I loved her. I loved our children. I was prepared to commit to her for life. But even at that day, in that most happiest of moments, I didn't understand what that love would truly be like. So we're going to wrap it up with this last question. I'm going to pass it around. Have you experienced that? I know, Tony, we'll go ahead and start with you since you already mentioned it. How your love grows, where you were at when you met or when you got married. And I mean emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, and where you're at now. And we'll pass that around the room as we close out.
I didn't cliche again. I didn't know what love or relationship could be. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I had this opinion in my mind when I was first got married. I thought, I'm a man. I'm going to provide for my family. I was a pastor at the time. I was going to go on my mission in the world. I was going around preaching, doing everything I was going to do. And my wife was back there. She's going to support me. And she was, you know, my family was here. And I spent more time at work, at church, at everything else. Everything was focused on outwardly. And I did not pay attention to my family. I wasn't seeing that. And I didn't understand what it meant to be a real partner, to really put her first, you know, to love my wife like Christ loves the church. I didn't understand it. I didn't get it. I was thinking too much about myself and I was too outwardly focused. And I didn't realize how much your wife was supposed to be your partner, you know, together with it, not in the background, not just supporting you, but being together in a mission together. And I didn't understand how much you could be, how vulnerable you could be to let a person really know you, and how much that means more when they really know you, how much that loving still means so much. Because once somebody really knows you, are they really going to still love me? You know, they really know me, you know, and she does. And I didn't know what a partnership, what a love could be, what the kind of fun we could have together, we're Bonnie and Clyde together. And we're we're on a mission together. It's life together. And I didn't understand that. I thought everybody had their place. She was in her place. I was in my place, and we do life like that. But I didn't understand the coming together, the one flesh. I didn't understand it. I do now. And man, it's so valuable. It's just so valuable to me. I couldn't live without it now. I'd be torn apart. I just would not be able to live. So I would definitely say my wife has taught me that. She's awesome.
Awesome. Andrew, what do you think? Has your love grown over the years, and have you been able to upgrade in all those aspects that we talked about, emotionally, physically, spiritually? Where were you then, and where are you now?
Well, I'll say I take it a little bit more seriously. Listen, I have slip ups.
Mhm.
You know, being totally transparent with you. This morning, with all the stuff going on, we got into a mini argument, and it was partly my fault, not entirely, but partly. So, but these are the things, you know, and so now I say, okay, next time I realize that this is more important to her than maybe per se it was to me. And so I should have took it a little bit more seriously. So yeah, it's a lot of that. You know, when we talk about, you know, you hear people saying the person is a helpmate. You know, the woman is your helpmate, meaning that they don't provide any value, or it's not equal, or this, that, and the other.
Right.
Well, example that I like to use, and I use this example when it comes to that, is, you know, Batman had Robin. You know, Michael Jordan had Scottie Pippen. You know, Shaq had Kobe. And at the time they were winning, there was one person necessarily better than the other person, but they couldn't have done it without the other person. And see, and that's what to me marriage is about. You know, there's certain things that you just aren't going to be able to do unless you have that person, that significant other in your life, that's providing that positive feedback and taking care of things. You know, one thing that was really, I had some insecurities about being married, because I was like, the children come along, will the woman be able to take care of the children if I'm out of town, or I go away for a week or two or something like that? What's going to happen? I'm worrying in the back of my mind, she's probably not going to be able to do it. Well, our marriage had been tested from 2019, 2020. I had to travel about 6-7 times. And each time I had to travel, it was for 2 weeks at a time, you know, and we had at that time a 2-year-old. So, you know, and everything ended up working out smoothly. And, you know, my wife handled a very difficult time, you know, a very difficult situation by herself, essentially for 2 weeks. And a lot of people say, well, single mothers do it all the time. But that's not necessarily the issue. The issue is it relieved my insecurity about whether or not it can be done. Because I'm always the type of person that if I'm not involved, this isn't going to work, you know, my ego, you know, the ego. And so that's partly how it works. Another thing too, that I'll say really closing, is that, you know, my wife got me closer to God on a spiritual connection. She really did. I mean, because I wasn't, you know, going to church or anything when we met. She got me into the church. I'm more involved in the church. I do a lot of things to help out. So that was one thing that she did that I wasn't even remotely doing at all. So, and I thank her for that, you know, that she did those things. But it's that combined with, like I said, I had somewhat of an ego, and the phrase that I use, what ego stands for, is edge God out. And when I got married, the ego so slowly but surely started to subside. And so that would be my remarks on the whole thing.
Awesome. Heather, what do you got on this last topic of how has your relationship grown over time? And then close out with how people can contact you for your businesses.
Sure. So I met my husband at 19 and he was 21.
I remember.
So yeah, babies. So we got to essentially grow up together and navigate our relationship, kids, families, everything. We got to go through it together. His path, he went off the path a little bit and came back, but we're still growing together. We're only 2 years apart. Like I said, he didn't come from a mom and dad at home every day. Neither did I. So we're trying to just display that for our kids, that no matter what happens, you can stick it out, you can work it out, you know, and keep it going. And a funny thing my daughter says all the time, my husband's got a very dry sense of humor. And as Rob knows, I laugh at everything. It doesn't matter, good, bad. I've a very
the best friend growing up.
Thanks. So she says it quite often. Mom, how do you guys stay together? Or she'll say it to her father. Dad, how do you guys stay together? And I said, you know what? It's all about who you want to annoy for the rest of your life and who you want to be annoyed by. Because if you can
My
take
wife said the
that,
same
then you
thing.
can work with anything. And she's like, okay, I guess that makes sense. She's 19. So it's we've grown a lot. We're still growing. And now that my kids are older, we're rediscovering each other as if we were younger, learning like how to go out and have fun again and do things together again. Because my kids are 17 and 19. They don't need us anymore.
Wow.
Kind of. Kind of.
We get more time
But-
together for sure.
Yeah. So it's as they grew up, it was hard, and it's getting a little easier now. It's different, but like I said, it's, you know, we're rediscovering ourselves almost as if we were young again.
I think that's so funny. I never heard that in my life until me and my wife have been together all these years.
Yeah.
And she says to me quite regularly, "It is my job to annoy you for the rest of your life." And so I thought that's very funny. Heather, please, before we get out of here, tell the people how they can contact you. Like I said before, I really like not for me, but for anyone that wants a good tan with organic products. I love that you use organic products. I love that you go right to the home. And then I do have a wonderful, beautiful bag that you made me with the Create Ingredients logo that I use for the beach, the towels, snacks on the way to the beach. And I'm really appreciative of that. She shot me that on the strength. So let's hear where we can get in contact with you and check these amazing products out. I really appreciate you coming on.
Sure. So Jersey Girl Tans, you can find me on Instagram at Jersey Girl Tans or on Facebook, Jersey Girl Tans. Again, my products are all natural, gluten-free, organic, and you get to tan like a celebrity. I come to your house and do everything for you. My bags, we actually just had our first vendor show yesterday that my husband was very supportive of and assisted me with the entire day.
Awesome.
And we made out pretty good. But that you can find on Facebook too, Totes with Quotes by Heather.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming on so much. I actually had a blast, and I think that people are going to get some really valuable information. Thank you all for listening in as well. God bless.
Thanks,
guys.
Rob.
Take it easy.